Hello, I'm Jack Fink, and welcome to Eye on Politics on CBS News, Dallas-Fort Worth. A new poll is out in the Texas governor's race as Governor Greg Abbott and Beto O'Rourke argue over defunding the police. We'll get to that shortly, but first we begin with one of the key political races this fall in North Texas, Tarrant County Judge. Republican Tim O'Hare and Democrat Deborah Peoples are vying to succeed Republican Glenn Whitley, who's retiring this year. Both Peoples and O'Hare are former county party chairs, and we caught up with each of them this week. Peoples explained why she believes voters should elect her.
Wow, that's an easy one, because not only am I extremely qualified, having served as a vice president for AT&T for 30 years, people don't realize, Jack, this is an administrative job. It's about managing a budget. It's about forecasting and taking care of the county's residents' business. But beyond that, I'm extremely qualified, I'm committed, but I am concerned about all the residents of Tarrant County, not just one group of residents of Tarrant County, but all the residents. I want Tarrant County to grow and to continue to grow and to thrive. And that's why my campaign slogan is Tarrant means business. We're gonna make sure we continue to bring economic development here. We're gonna take care of our residents, not only in terms of great jobs, but great health care and great infrastructure.
I was just going to ask you, you mentioned a lot there. So what are your top priorities?
Economic development has got to be number one. If you look at us, we grew by 17% in the last decade. We have people moving here who need jobs, and they need good paying jobs. But with that growth, we also have to worry about number two, infrastructure. I mean, we were talking, and we've got in many of the cities some aging infrastructure. In a lot of the newer areas, we've got to get new infrastructure. People need to be able to get to these jobs, so we need good roads, good bridges, good transportation options. And then finally, the third thing I care about is health. And I know people say that, they think that's a strange thing. It's not. We have John Peter Smith Hospital, which is the only level 1 trauma center in Tarrant County. It is also a teaching ground for many of our physicians, and we need to be able to guarantee our residents a good health care options so that they are healthy, they can get to these jobs, and also mental health options.
Let's talk about jobs and economic development. A lot of business obviously has moved to North Texas. Mm-hmm. So how do you compete with Dallas, with Plano, Frisco, and bring those businesses that may come to those areas and attract them over to Fort Worth and Tarrant County?
Well, I don't know if you noticed, but Tarrant County actually won out in the economic wars. We brought more businesses to Tarrant County than Dallas County saw last year. You do that with good, steady leadership that is not partisan. You don't pander to one group or another. You represent all the residents of Tarrant County, and that is what businesses want to see. Jack, I talked about this many times. I worked on committees when we brought businesses, when AT&T looked at businesses. You want good, steady leadership. You want good infrastructure. You want people that work together and there's not a lot of conflict. You want them to focus on providing opportunities so that people can get these good jobs.
You mentioned affordable health care, and I'm wondering, and you mentioned JPS. So what specifically do you want to do? What do you have in mind to improve health care for people in the county?
So number one, I am committed to seeing us, seeing the bond issue that the voters voted on to completion. I mean, we're building new facilities and we have to do that. And part of that facility is our whole mental health facilities. Jack, we have many people who are suffering from the impact of the pandemic. We need to give people an outlet, someplace to go when they have mental health issues. But also, one of the things, and I've talked to doctors at for-profit hospitals, John Peter Smith Hospital is a lifeline in the community, not only for as a nonprofit hospital, but for for-profit hospitals, because it gives every resident an opportunity to be seen. And so some people may never go to John Peter Smith in their life unless they have a trauma or an emergency. But what John Peter Smith does is, because many people do go there, it relieves the burden of the for-profit hospital. So working together, we provide an overall safety net for the residents of Tarrant County.
And another thing that I saw on your website as one of your priorities is affordable housing.
Absolutely.
We've heard this issue, for years, and I'm wondering, what do you have a specific plan to address this?
So I think it all goes back to rethinking housing and what housing looks like and affordable housing. For so long, we've been the land of the single family home. But if you've noticed, we've had more apartment starts and condominiums and townhomes. Homes. I think we have to reimagine what housing looks like, and then be willing and to work with realtors, with builders to reimagine that and create opportunities so that people can get into home ownership.
So in other words, reimagine it and to encourage home ownership.
That's right.
Single family.
Well, but it could be a condo, it could be a townhouse, and so it could be an apartment. I think we have to look at what housing looks like. And for too long, we have felt like it was only a single family home and, on a half acre, and that's just not going to be the possible in the future.
I wanted to ask you, because I know, every time we cover a news story on property taxes, there's a lot of interest in that because, with the soaring property values that we've seen here in North Texas, that raises property taxes, even if rates don't go up. And even if they go down a little bit, people are still. So I wanted to ask you, what your thoughts were. Where are you on the issue of property taxes, and do you think that they need to be lowered?
Oh, absolutely. I'm a homeowner. Okay. I'm also a senior citizen. And so I see that every year when my appraisal goes up. But Jack, people need to understand what's driving these property taxes. If you go and look at your tax bill, the majority of your tax bill are school taxes. And so one of the things I want to do when I'm elected county judge is go to Austin and talk to our lawmakers, talk to our delegation about fully funding public schools, so then we start to bring taxes down. I will tell you, Tarrant County has done a good job of keeping their portion of the tax bill low. There has not been, my hat is off to the Commissioner's Court for not seeing big raises in the tax bill. They have kept them even. And I think in the budget, there are plans to try to keep them even again. But as long as appraisals keep going up, homeowners are going to continue to get sticker shock. And the only way we fix that is down in Austin.
And specifically on the school part of the tax.
Right. They have to. We have to look at ways to fully fund public schools, because people are, if you go and look at your tax bill, you'll see part of it is your municipal tax, part of it is your county tax, but you're also paying exorbitant school taxes.
And just to clarify, so you're saying as far as the county portion of the property tax,
yes,
you're satisfied with where they are, or do you think?
You want to lower them if you can. You always. And so I will tell you, I laughed because some person was saying, well, I'll cut your tax bill by 20%. Well, people thought, oh, gee, if my taxes are $8,000, you're going to cut it by $1,600. I say it's truth in the numbers. The only portion they could cut is the county portion. And the county portion may have been only $800. So they're not cutting your taxes by $1,600. You may be cutting your taxes by $160. And so that's why I want people to understand how their taxes are calculated, what's in that tax bill. And then I think it's my job as the county leader to go and lobby those entities to try to get some tax relief.
And my last question to you, and I appreciate your time, is what is your path to victory?
Oh, it's talking to everybody. Tarrant County, third largest county in the state of Texas, 41 cities here, 2.1 million residents. And you cannot talk to just one group of people. You can't talk to just Democrats. You can't talk to just Republicans or Libertarians or Green Party. You have to talk to every resident. And so I had someone one day who said, Deborah Peoples, you got 2.1 million people here, a million registered voters. How are you going to talk to them? And I said, one voter at a time. And that's why I'm out knocking on doors, walking, talking to people, meeting with people, because I want to provide good, steady leadership for all the residents of Tarrant County, not just some of them.
Deborah Peoples, Democratic candidate for Tarrant County Judge. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you. We also asked O'Hare why he believes he should be elected.
This position needs a responsible, disciplined leader. I'll bring that to the role of county judge in Tarrant County. We need property tax relief in Tarrant County. In this age of incredible, staggering inflation, we need to let people keep more of their money, and I have talked from day one about we're going to cut your property taxes. People also want someone who's going to be strong on crime. We will fully fund the Sheriff's Department. We will fully fund the District Attorney's Office. My opponent was a proponent of defund the police when she ran for mayor. We also need people who will speak the truth and speak up on issues, not worried about, is it going to affect the re-election? Is the media going to come after them? Is the mob going to come after them? But will speak truth and lead, on things like education. Parents should have the final say in their children's education, and I'll be someone that will speak out on issues that are important of the day that are affecting Americans all across the county.
So let me ask you just about property taxes. How do you lower them?
Well, so the first thing you do is you be committed to it, and you look for ways to do it. You be intentional about it. In today's climate for jobs, you have people that are leaving the county, leaving places of employment all over the place, private, public, it doesn't matter. So attrition will be a big way to address it. And you have to look, so what does government do when somebody leaves a job? They immediately rush to go put a post out there, a job opening, hey, we got to hire someone. What I want to do is make everybody in the county that loses an employee bring to the Commissioner's Court a request to fill that position, and they're going to have to tell us why we need to fill it, why it can't be combined with another job, and so you can accomplish a ton of it just right there. With having entrepreneurial, business-minded leadership, you can always find ways to be more efficient. And one of the things that we've talked about throughout the campaign is we're going to seek to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse. In every organization, especially in government organizations, there's always excessive spending, there's always waste, and we're going to be intentional about finding it, and we're going to make sure our department heads and other elected officials are intentional about finding it, and we'll be able to provide real tax relief to our residents for our next budget.
You also mention on your website, as far as your priorities are concerned, jobs and the economy. How do you attract businesses to Tarrant County? Obviously, a lot has come, and Fort Worth has expanded, at least on the north side. But as far as the county is concerned, and I'm just wondering, because Collin County is very active, Dallas County obviously very active, so how do you compete with them?
Yeah. You bring up a great question. So if you take a look at the tax base in Tarrant County and Fort Worth, you'll see that we're too reliant on residential homes. So how do you address that? You bring in more high-quality companies with more high-quality jobs. Just going to the businesses and saying, this place is open for business, this is an awesome place, that's the first step. Again, it's about being intentional. You can't just sit around and say, we want high-quality companies to come to Tarrant County and then just hope they knock on the door. You have to go out and find them. And the biggest piece of it all, I think, that I can bring as county judge is when businesses, relocators, cities want someone who will be the biggest and best salesman for Tarrant County in that meeting, where we can tell people why this is an incredible place to live, why this is the place they can come. I've done that. I've had experience doing it. We've brought a lot of companies in my former elected role. It's something I love to do, and I believe this with all of my heart. Tarrant County, Fort Worth, Arlington, this whole place where I live, South Lake, this is an awesome place to live. It is Texas, and it is the friendliest side of the Metroplex. It's the most laid back, and I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just a great place to live, go to church, raise a family, and work, and we got to do a better job of selling it, and I think I can bring that to the table.
So you're talking about you as county judge going out and actively recruiting.
Absolutely, and I'm talking about us doing it at the county, and I'm talking about the cities that are doing it, me being a partner next to them if they want it, where I will sit in on those meetings with them and tell them why this is a great place to be and why they ought to relocate to Fort Worth or South Lake or Bedford or wherever it may be.
Another thing that you mentioned on your website, having an election integrity officer. Why do you think that's necessary, and does this person replace the elections administrator?
No, not at all. So why I think this is necessary is twofold. One, there are a lot of people that have lost faith in our elections. So what this person will do is they will act like an auditor, and they're going to go look at our processes, look at our procedures, independent from elections administration, independent from the commissioner's court, and make recommendations on how to make sure our elections are safe and secure so that everyone can feel confident that when they cast their vote, it's going to be counted. That's one piece of it, but I think that's probably the more simple piece of it and the one that'll take the least amount of time. The second piece of it is they're going to go out and actively seek to find people committing voter fraud. So you take sex trafficking, drug trafficking. We have task forces going out into the community to find it and root it out. They're just not, law enforcement's not just sitting around waiting for somebody to call and say, hey, I think there's human trafficking going on next door. They're actively seeking to root it out, find it, and put bad people behind bars. We don't have anyone in Tarrant County actively going out to seek to find it. And you know what? What if we find that there's not much going on? Great. It's good for everybody. How much fraud is okay? I would say none. So that's what that person's going to do. And I've talked to Phil Sorrells, our district attorney candidate, who I think will also win in November. And we'll coordinate with him and his office. And whether we do it this way or we do it through someone in the DA's office that's doing it, it's an important thing that voters in Tarrant County want and deserve.
I was just going to ask you, isn't that a DA function?
It's a DA function to prosecute them. It's not necessarily a DA's function to go out and find it. That's more of a law enforcement function.
But this person wouldn't be a law enforcement officer, right?
Well, no, they would have full law enforcement investigative authority if it goes the way that I've proposed it. But you got to get 3 votes, and you got to get 2 other commissioners to approve it for it to happen. But I feel confident in saying we're going to have someone addressing election integrity and election fraud in Tarrant County if I'm fortunate enough to be elected.
During the primary, when we had an interview, you told me that your campaign was about keeping Tarrant County the largest Republican county in the state. Is this campaign designed now the same way? I mean, is this a priority for you?
Well, certainly we want Tarrant County to remain a Republican county. I'm proud to be a Republican. I think Republican ideas are the best way to govern. We don't want to have excessive bloat. We don't want to have excessive spending. Ultimately, I think our message about being tough on crime, lowering property taxes, being a voice for parents and education, eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse, I think it's a universal message, and we should all be doing that. You know, sometimes people get caught up in, well, he's a Republican, he's a Democrat, whatever the case may be. Ultimately, everybody wants good government, and everybody wants consistent, reliable, disciplined leadership. That's what I'll bring to Tarrant County.
And my final question is, what is your path to victory?
Our path to victory is get Republicans out to vote and win over people in the middle. Win over undecided voters, win over Democrats who are saying, I'm not sure I like what's going on inside our party. People need to know that I'm someone that can work with everyone. I'm someone that will listen to everyone. And at the end of the day, we're all Americans, we're all Tarrant County, we should all be pulling in the same direction, and I'm the kind of person that can bring people together and lead and do it with listening to everyone.
Tim O'Hare, Republican candidate for Tarrant County Judge, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Jack, always.
We appreciate it.
You bet.
Another week, another poll in the Texas governor's race. The University of Texas Texas Politics Project poll of 1,200 registered voters shows Republican Governor Greg Abbott with a 5 percentage point lead over Democrat Beto O'Rourke, 45 to 40%. 11% said they either want someone else or don't have an opinion. This week, Governor Abbott brought his re-election campaign to Fort Worth, where he sharply criticized Democrat Beto O'Rourke's past comments, claiming they show he supports efforts to defund the police. After the Fort Worth and Austin police associations endorsed Greg Abbott for a third term, the governor accused his Democratic opponent, Beto O'Rourke, of supporting efforts to defund the police.
Beto's approach to defund the police is an extraordinarily dangerous approach, a deadly approach.
Abbott is referring to comments O'Rourke made about defunding the police during the Looking Ahead to Beto Days podcast in June of 2020, after George Floyd was killed by a Minneapolis police officer.
I really love that Black Lives Matters and other protesters have put this front and center to defund, these line items that have over-militarized our police, and instead invest that money in the human capital of your community. And then also in some necessary cases, completely dismantling those police forces and rebuilding them.
Governor Abbott's news conference come amid his campaign's ad blitz on this issue, but the O'Rourke campaign is pushing back. An O'Rourke campaign spokesman points out the governor's ads are heavily edited and misleading, and that O'Rourke was only speaking out about the Minneapolis Police Department and not any departments in Texas. The spokesman says when O'Rourke was a councilman and congressman representing El Paso, he voted to increase police funding. His campaign sent CBS 11 a video from this past July, answering a supporter who approved of defunding the police.
I don't see eye to eye with you on defunding the police. I want to make sure that we can count on the police, and that means making sure that they have the resources and funding they need, the training that they need.
When asked about this, the governor said O'Rourke has a credibility problem.
But this is a recurring problem that Beto has. He says one thing when running for one office and a completely different thing running for a different office.
Abbott's campaign says the governor has been backed by 17 law enforcement organizations across the state. Senator Ted Cruz is criticizing Senate Democrats for blocking his proposed bill that he says would have made schools safer across the country. It all took place on the Senate floor. Senator Ted Cruz told us that his Securing Our Schools Act includes $15 billion to double the number of school resource officers, $10 billion to hire 15,000 mental health professionals for middle and high schools, and another $2.5 billion for physical security improvements on campuses. The senator admitted to me that the measure may be blocked. After giving his speech this afternoon, one senator, Democrat Chris Murphy of Connecticut, stood up to object and said he refused to debate the merits of the bill.
This isn't real. This is a TV show. This is clickbait. This is theater. This isn't an actual attempt to pass legislation.
That objection is wrong. It's irresponsible. And it shows a willingness to play political games.
The midterm election is less than 60 days away, but the House and Senate are back in session before they break for campaigning. To discuss more of this, we're joined now by CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian. Welcome, Nicole. Nice to see you. And so what bills are being considered in each chamber before the November election?
Well, Jack, as you know, there's not a whole lot of time, so lawmakers are trying to get as much done as they can. The must-pass piece of legislation in both chambers is funding the government before the end of the month, even if that is on a short-term basis. And so far, congressional leaders have seemed pretty committed to get that done to try to avert a shutdown. Here in the Senate, we're also following a piece of legislation that would codify marriage equality rights into law. This is something that we saw Democrats in particular push for in the wake of the overturning of Roe versus Wade. First, they tried to codify abortion rights into law. So far, that hasn't cleared this Congress, but they are now trying to codify marriage equality protections into law. And so we already saw the House pass legislation on a bipartisan basis to do that. Now there are bipartisan discussions here in the Senate, and the hope is that they can try to get that done before they recess at the end of the month.
New inflation numbers out that were higher than expected. How are the White House and Congress responding, and how might this play as we get closer to the midterms?
Well, we know there's a big event at the White House this afternoon where President Biden and congressional Democrats are touting the recent passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, which they continue to argue will help to bring inflation down and bring those rising costs down, although certainly today's numbers aren't necessarily an indication of that. President Biden still saying that he believes that progress is being made, and at least, gas prices appear to be holding steady and down in his view. But that being said, we know, food prices continue to be high. We heard Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell talking on the floor today about the rising cost of eggs and butter and those food staple items. So this is going to continue to be a messaging that we hear from both sides of the aisle as Democrats try to tout this legislation and argue that it will help bring costs down, whether that's for prescription drugs and healthcare costs and energy prices. Republicans, on the other hand, continue to argue that they feel that Democrats are contributing to the problem by passing all of this big spending legislation that they feel has only made this inflation problem worse, and why they argue they should have control of Congress come November.
Has President Biden's recent criticism of MAGA Republicans helped Democrats in the midterms, at least in the polls? And what about, does it ward off concerns that some Democrats may have about him running again in 2024?
Yeah, well, this is certainly strategic messaging on the part of Democrats as they try to paint Republicans in particular as being too extreme, although likewise we often see, Republicans try to paint Democrats as extreme and socialist. And some of that is even bearing out in some of our recent CBS News polling that is showing this kind of polarized, divisive environment where both sides see the other not only as political opposition, but as enemies. And so there is a concern about, some of the rhetoric that is being used and whether that could heighten divisions. That being said, there continues to be a divide among Democrats as to whether or not the president should run. We saw, for instance, Ohio Senate candidate Tim Ryan say recently when asked whether or not the president should run again in 2024 that he does feel perhaps that it's time for a generational shift, if you will. So I think this will be something that we continue to see well past the midterms as Democrats and Republicans have to look at who will be their standard bearer come 2024.
CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian, thank you so much for joining us from Capitol Hill. We appreciate it. And be sure to see more of the latest political reporting tonight on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell right here on CBS 11 at 5:30, right after CBS 11 News at 5. Two separate organizations are discussing their new polls and how they could impact the outcome of the November midterm election. We spoke with Cristina Tzintzún Ramirez, a former Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate in Texas, who's now president and executive director of Next Gen America, which seeks to empower younger voters.
So, the youth vote is incredibly important. The largest generational voting bloc are now young people in this country. And in 2018 and 2020, we've seen historic record turnout of young people. And what is clear in this midterm is that we expect, again, record-breaking turnout of young people. They overwhelmingly are going to break for Democrats, and that the Dobbs decision overturning Roe and access to safe, legal, and abortion is driving thousands of young people to register. Here in our home state of Texas, we've seen a surge of young people registering. 37% of all new registrations post the Dobbs decision in Texas are from young people.
And it is now, obviously, here in Texas, and many states have their own laws now. And the new law here in Texas that went into effect late last month bans most abortions with the exception to save the life of the mother. So what is the biggest concern for these women that you speak about, these young women who are registering to vote as it relates to, let's say, a congressional bill?
Well, what's clear is that young people, 2 in 3 of the young people we surveyed said they believe that abortion is on the ballot this election. And so people understand 76% of young people were opposed, 76% of young women were opposed to the Dobbs decision, 76%. So overwhelmingly, young women, especially across the country, feel like their health, their most private decisions have really, that basic fundamental freedom has been taken away from them. And so it is mobilizing and motivating an entire generation of young women to either vote for the first time in a midterm or go and get registered.
And are they concerned that, there could be, if Congress goes Republican, as we have heard for the last several months, at least in the House, that there could be a national law?
Yes, that's right. That's why 2 and 3 believe that abortion is on the ballot this election, that they are fearful that not only will it be outlawed in places like Texas, but there will be a national ban on abortion, making it illegal everywhere across the country to access safe, legal abortion. And if we look at what happened in Kansas, an initiative there to further restrict abortion was overwhelmingly defeated, and you saw huge swaths of people voting for the first time, especially young women that have never voted before on any initiative like that. It was just, we can see that this issue is so personal, so critical for so many people's lives, their health, their future, their families, that people feel like, I was talking to a young woman actually at UT Austin last week that said, I have to get registered because it feels like it's do or die. Literally, I feel like my life is on the line this election.
It's one thing to register, it's another to actually go out and vote. And so how concerned are you? Young people don't tend to vote as in larger numbers as older people.
That's right.
So tell me a little bit about your efforts to make sure that they actually get to the polls.
I mean, at NextGen, we are the country's largest youth voting rights organization. Last election, we helped mobilize 1 in 9 young people to the polls. And that's why we've chosen also to invest in Texas, because we are the 3rd youngest state. Only Utah and Alaska are younger than Texas. 1 in 3 eligible voters is under the age of 30. But for that power, electoral power, to be really felt, people have to come out and vote. So we're contacting millions of young people, texting them, calling them, being on campuses, and making sure they make their voices heard this election. We have seen big shifts in voter turnout. So over half of young eligible voters voted last election across the country. That's the highest youth voter turnout in American history. In 2022 is projected to be on par with 2022 with the youth vote turnout that helped Democrats win back the House.
From 2020, you're saying that
from 2018, we're projected to see turnout from what we saw in 2018, which was also a historic turnout for midterms, because of course, midterms have lower turnout than the general election.
And what do you make of the Texas Democratic Party urging its local party chairs, its local precinct chairs, and others to mobilize women in their communities on the abortion issue?
The data is overwhelmingly clear that most women, and especially young women, are completely opposed to the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and including in Texas, including with Republican women, that this taking us back to a time where we had abortion was not safe and not legal. We decided as a country to make abortion safe and legal because we were tired of seeing our mothers, our sisters, and friends dying in backroom abortions. And I think young women understand that that is the consequence of this decision.
And let me ask you, because when you look at the polls, and certainly this issue is key among Democrats who are polled, and among younger Democrats, like you said, but I'm wondering, there's still inflation, concerns over pricing, certainly at the supermarket, et cetera. And I'm wondering, how do you counterbalance that? I mean, I know you have this issue here, but when you're talking about people's pocketbooks, ability to buy food, et cetera, are you concerned that that is still a bigger issue?
I mean, I think that Democrats and all candidates have to respond to people's real economic needs. And the fact is that while our economy has started to turn around, we still need to do a lot more to make sure that every single family can meet their basic needs. And so there has been progress. The decision to cancel a big portion of student debt. For example, half of Latinos will see their student debt completely wiped out. So that is transformative. I was just meeting with another young woman, Vianney Preciado, in the Valley, who had her student debt canceled. Her dad's a mechanic, her mom's a cosmetologist. This isn't just going to transform her life, but her entire family's life, who's been trying to help her pay off that debt. So those economic initiatives by Democrats are helping. And of course, the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, which is going to invest billions into building a new clean energy economy. But at the end of the day, when we look at the most popular issues to address the economic pain that people feel, whether it's raising the minimum wage or outstanding support for unions in this country, or paid parental leave, that those issues, it's clear where Democrats stand and where Republicans are totally opposed to even basic guarantees in raising the minimum wage to match inflation.
I know there has been some controversy surrounding the president's executive order to cancel some of the student debt as far as their schooling, their university studies, et cetera. And I'm wondering, how concerned are you that, people who didn't go to college, our taxpayers are paying for this, and that, that angle of people out there who may not be so happy about this?
Well, it's clear that the vast majority of Americans support canceling student debt. Every single poll shows that. And that this is an investment in the American people, right? That this isn't about policy, this is about people. I mentioned Vianney, first in her family to go to college. Another young woman, Shelly, that I was meeting with in Houston. She's grew up in the foster care system, saw her student debt wiped out, felt like she can finally start a family. The truth is that this is just a step in addressing building the 21st century educational system we need. That at the end of the day, we have to make sure that college is affordable and accessible to every single American that wants it. That when we decided as a country to make K through 12 public education free, people said back then that was crazy, but what a high school diploma is today, what a college degree is today, is what a high school diploma was. So we have to build a system that is better equipped to invest in our greatest asset as a country, which is the American people. And that's why the vast majority of Americans support canceling student debt and taking the next step to make sure college is accessible to everyone.
Christina Cincun Ramirez, president of Next Gen America, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we hear from Luke Macias, director of the Defend Texas Liberty PAC, about the findings of a new poll they had conducted about newly registered voters in Texas.
So we're conducting a series of polls throughout the general election of Republican primary voters and just general election voters as a whole. But we went in with something specific that we haven't really seen replicated, which is an analysis of the newly registered voters in Texas. Texas has registered over 1.1 million voters. The number isn't exact. It actually could be quite higher than that. But ultimately, we've registered more voters since November of 2020 than the 8 smallest states in the entire nation. So we've imported a massive amount of new individuals, fellow citizens, our neighbors who have opinions. And so we wanted to go in and specifically analyze who are these people. 40% of the newly registered voters have moved to Texas in the last 2 years. So the people who are registering, some of them have been here for a little while, but not participated in the political process. And many of them are newly coming. I mean, I have some of them in my church, and I'm sure other people do too. What we ultimately found out was that there is a 20-point advantage for Republicans amongst these new voters. So we don't know how many of them are going to participate in the November election. But if they do come out, to whatever extent they do, it should benefit Republicans. There's about a 20% advantage. 44% of these newly registered voters identify as Republicans, 24% identify as Democrats, and 32% say they're independent. Texas is different than other states. In Florida, when you register, you identify yourself as a party, either a Republican or a Democrat. We don't have partisan registration. So this is our only shot to get really a perspective of what do these people believe. When you start asking about different issues, whether it's banning sex change surgeries on kids, giving illegals taxpayer subsidies, the death penalty, so on and so forth, these people line up as Republicans even more so. They have more conservative views. 62% think we should ban puberty blockers for children versus 25% supporting. So when you start asking them even about specific issues with immigration, with criminal justice, with some of the social cultural issues that are facing our state on property tax relief, they line up even more Republican. So this tells us that the more these people participate in the process, the better Republicans will do in November.
And let me ask you, as far as, just the breakdown of the partisan affiliation, where you have more independents than Democrats. When you set out to do the poll, did you try to get a certain amount of each, in the sense, or is there really not any way you can control that?
It's a great question. Really, what we can control is making sure that this is an accurate sample of those who have recently registered. So if a certain percentage of the newly registered voters are under the age of 35 or over the age of 70, then we need to make sure that our poll is balanced in accordance with the actual breakdown. We don't know what percentage of people registered are Democrats or Republicans. And so those bear themselves out in the numbers. But ultimately what we do is we go in and we make sure that the data we're collecting is from an accurate sample demographically of those who have recently registered, and this poll is.
Let me ask you about the issues that are most important to these newly registered voters. You have a whole bunch of issues listed there. One thing that's not is inflation in the economy. Why did you decide against having that as a choice?
That's a great question. So basically what we wanted to understand is where these people fell on cultural lines. So we had abortion, we had immigration, we have issues on this that really reflect the more cultural divides that we have as a nation, gun rights, things like that. So we really wanted to know on the cultural issues where these people put themselves into different buckets. And what we found was that Republicans still hold an advantage overall. The largest, let's say the largest subset that has interest in one category is abortion. But when you dig into that, it's largely Democrats. And of course, yes, there are some independents that still care about it. However, a lot of Republicans are still care about property taxes. They care about border security, and they care about things that matter more to a Republican, or let's say a right of center individual in Texas.
One of the interesting things on that is, while you do have more Republicans and independents than Democrats, abortion came out to be the number one issue, the largest concern among everybody in the poll. And that's because I would imagine 60% of the Democrats said that this was their number one issue. So what does this tell you? And does it cause any concern, or should it cause any concern for Republicans?
Abortion is definitely the issue that's giving Democrats the energy on their side. They're more unified behind one singular issue. Republicans, if you look at them, they're equally divided between issues like gun rights, border security, and things like that are really affecting them and they care most deeply about. Democrats have really honed in on abortion as their number one cultural driver. It is what's driving their energy. It is going to help them drive voters to the polls in November. Really, what we take away from it is that ultimately a majority of independents in this poll can be gotten if you talk about the cultural issues. We believe if there is a conversation about the cultural issues facing Texas, Republicans are going to win the independent voters, because when it comes to the sexualization of children, the transitionary therapy that minors are receiving, criminal justice issues, the issues of the invasion going on at the border, they're going to side with the Republican Party. So we believe that Republicans shouldn't shy away from the cultural issues, but be willing to address them, knowing that yes, abortion is an issue that they're going to disagree with some independents on, and pretty much every Democrat.
I was just going to ask you about that because independents, it was the number one issue as well, 24%. I guess the question then becomes, for these independents, I would imagine, is, do they look at it through the abortion as being the number one issue to them? Or do they look at the other issues that you have here, whether it's border security, election integrity, gun rights, property taxes, and education, and say, okay, those as a group are more important than this one as abortion. Is that right?
I think what we have to realize is that if you are an independent voter and abortion is your number one issue, you're probably not voting Republican in November. And sometimes what some Republicans tend to do is they try to chase that one individual and try to see what it is they can do to get their vote. We would argue that if you look at independents as a whole, 60% of them are gettable by Republicans. They're with us on the sexualization of children. They're with us on our positions on education. They're with us on our positions of the border. Republicans historically have not won the independent vote in our state. We do well with independent voters, but we don't need to win them because there are more Republicans than Democrats. In this poll in particular, we're just looking at the new registered voters. What we would say is it is very easy to split the independents in this poll, if not overperform with independents. And if we even win them slightly, then it means that of the new registered voters voting, Republicans are going to walk away with a more than 20% margin, which could really help us in some of these swing districts.
And so as far as, you know, the Republicans, so you're saying they really shouldn't be too worried about the fact that abortion has really galvanized Democrats?
Abortion has definitely given Democrats the energy. Republicans need to not obsess over that and realize that when it comes to the laundry list of cultural issues facing our state, we are on the side of the vast majority of people on almost every single issue. And we need to make Democrats defend their very radical positions on those issues instead of obsessing over just how much abortion is energizing the Democrat base.
Can I have you say that again, just because there was a little
Yeah.
hiccup there in the
Yep.
audio?
Yep.
So let me ask the question
Yeah.
again. So your advice to Republicans is they shouldn't be too concerned about the fact that abortion has galvanized Democrats?
Yeah, we believe that at the end of the day, if we take a look at the overall view of these newly registered voters and most Texans on the laundry list of cultural issues facing our state, whether it be the education, sexualization of our children, the invasion at the border, all the immigration struggles that Texas has right now, we need to understand that they are with the Republican Party, and we should put Democrats on defense regarding their radical views in those particular arenas. That would be better for Republicans to do than to obsess over the fact that abortion as an issue is really motivating the Democrat base. We understand that it's done that, and we're not going to change that. But what we can change is what we talk about from now till November. And the more we focus on all of these different issues, the more we are going to define Democrats as just as radical as they are, and the more out of touch they will be to the average Texan.
And, you know, the fact that when you look at what motivates the Republicans as far as the issues, border security, you know, is number one, followed by elections integrity, and then gun rights. I'm wondering, because they are split over what their number one concern is, does that dissipate some of the motivation or no?
So currently, we're not seeing any decrease in Republican motivation to vote in the fall. And this is just when it comes to nationwide polling that we're seeing all across the nation. Republican energy has not dissipated. We have seen Democrat energy increase. So they're really more in line with each other. The reason we find polls like this interesting is that because Republicans and Democrats are both coming into November with a decent amount of energy, granted, they care about different issues, but they're all very energized to vote, whether it's election integrity, gun rights, property rights, education, the sexualization of children, or abortion, they're motivated. So this is going to come down to, one, where do the independents fall, right? And then two, the newly registered voters that show up, which is what this poll said. Those people are, for the most part, not as big a participant in most of the public polling we see. And so this new group of voters that shows up, we believe are going to benefit Republicans even more, which is probably not going to be seen in most polling that you see from now until November.
Two other questions, Luke, and I appreciate your time. So just going back to the people who took part in this survey. So if people lived in Texas before but these are all newly registered voters. So it was either if you voted in the 2020 election and you said yes, that means you had to be from another state, right?
Yep.
And then the only other way you could participate is if you did not vote in 2020, but you are from Texas.
Yeah, so ultimately there's a set of eliminators that pollsters create to try to maintain as pure a sample as possible. Ultimately, we conducted this poll. When you register to vote, if you're an individual Texan out there and you registered 10 years ago, and I looked you up, and I registered when I was 18 years old, so 14 years ago. And if you look at my voter registration, you can see that I registered when when I was 18 years old. And so the same thing can be said for each and every one of the Texans. So we can go in and specifically say these 1.1 million Texans all registered to vote after the November 2020 elections. When you actually are polling somebody, and this is true within any poll, there's a set of eliminations you put in to make sure that you're talking to that individual voter, right? And those same rules were applied to this poll as well to try to keep the sample as accurate as possible.
And then my last question, just on the economy again. The fact that the economy was not a choice here, how much of it do you think, I mean, and this is, I guess, an educated guess really on your part, where do you think the economy, what kind of role do you think the economy will play in this election? Because inflation is a real thing. You see it at the supermarket and elsewhere, obviously. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
We'll definitely be testing that issue from now till November with our general election polling. So we're going to see just how motivated people are based on the economy and the inflation. And honestly, I think voters right now are really combining those issues. When you ask people who are concerned about the economy what their biggest concerns are, it's usually inflation because it's hitting their pocketbook. It's what they're thinking might lead to their unemployment at some point. The reality is that the more focused they are on the economy, the better for Republicans that will be. So we do believe that as those concerns grow, that's only going to benefit the Republican Party, since the Biden administration is largely seen as more responsible than any other politician when it comes to the economic ills that are facing our nation.
Okay, Luke Macias, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
I appreciate it, Jack. Thank you for having me on.
That's Eye on Politics for this week. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jack Fink. You're watching CBS News, Dallas-Fort Worth.